Hello and welcome. I'm Gill Thomas. I'm the Community Manager here at Global Cyber Alliance, and I'm delighted to be joined by Neira Jones, Cybersecurity Champion Consultant and International Speaker, and Brian Dilley, Group Director of Fraud and Financial Crime at Lloyds Banking Group. We're here to talk about securing your business against cyber attack. Very pleased to have you with us today. According to the latest government survey, 46% of micro and small businesses suffered a cyber attack or breach in the last 12 months. On top of this, 1/3 reported that cyber attempts were being made on their business on a weekly basis. Brian, what do you see as the biggest threat for UK small businesses, and why do you think they are such a target?
So I think they're always going to be a target because there's money to be made from attacking them. Whether that's by getting at their systems, getting their data, holding them to ransom with ransomware, or committing fraud against them. So it's inevitable that there'll be targets. I think there's a lot of awareness around the cyber risks, but not necessarily around the steps to take to protect yourselves. And I think the main message I would give really would be around some of the simple hygiene factors and doing the simple things well. So things like updating software patches, etc., as they come out, rather than leaving it a few days. So for those few days, you're open to attack. You're open to a vulnerability that you know exists. So some of those simple things can make a massive difference in some of those small businesses.
And Neira?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Brian, and I would add to that some small businesses are actually very, very important because they are part of an extended supply chain. So you may have very large organizations as their client, especially now as we have so much of anything as a service, so much cloud services all around. So targeting a small business, which in itself may be a small business, but by its very nature, it may have hundreds of corporate clients, and there might be that very obvious low-hanging fruit that the cyber criminals go after, not specifically because of them, but because who their clients are. And that's quite dangerous.
Brian, what services do Lloyds Bank provide for their small business customers?
Well, we do a great deal with our customers to try and help them to protect themselves against cyber attacks. So we do educational seminars, we do face-to-face seminars, which are obviously now moved online as well. We provide educational materials to help them to understand the latest cyber attacks and how they can protect themselves. And we're also working with the Global Cyber Alliance. We make them aware of the tools that are available to them to help them to protect themselves. To Neira's point about access to the wider ecosystem, we have a different approach to suppliers. With suppliers, we tend to have, particularly if there's any link between their systems and ours, we set a minimum standard for them, and we actually go and assess their controls, because that could be a weak point where they could get into our systems. So we have a minimum standard for suppliers. You couldn't do that with customers, but in both of them, we're really making sure that we're educating, making sure that they're aware of the tools that are available to them to protect themselves. And as I say, with suppliers, we're really trying to make sure that we're making sure they meet that minimum standard before they're allowed any access to our systems.
Okay, good. So there is a lot of help and support and services out there if you know where to look. But Neira, how can we close the gap? How can we increase awareness of the risks, services and solutions, and prioritise or operationalise cybersecurity within their business?
I think we all know that the technology is there. There is a lot of technology about. There is a lot of help for those who know where to find it. The problem we have really is, as always, a lack of communication. And when I say a lack of communication, it's not that there is no communication, it's that communication needs to be done in the right language for the audience. So if we're specifically talking about small businesses, what do they care about? Well, right now, they're facing a pandemic. They have cash flow problems. Because of the increased digitization, they're facing increased fraud. So trying to keep afloat and protect their business is about understanding what they actually care about. So when we communicate about cybersecurity and how to protect themselves and their customers, it's about making it real for them. So you are going to suffer scams. This what might be the outcome of a phishing scam on your company. You will lose money. Your customers will lose money. At some point, you will be liable for something which you really can ill afford. So it's a matter of communicating. I believe banks and financial services institutions in general, because of their posture and statute in the ecosystem, as in people generally trust banks, have a very big role to play in this, because they have the resources, they have the knowledge to be able to help these organizations. And indeed, they are doing that. I mean, regulations also play a big role. And there has been a shift over the years, and I'm sure Brian will agree with me. The PSD2, the Second Payment Services Directive, was a first in financial services regulation that makes such a big play in security. There was more or less none of it in the First Payment Services Directive. And this is because of increased digitization and changing customer behaviors. So it is all a mixture of environment, the challenges we have to face, and how to communicate in the right way. And also, most importantly, having the right processes in place to make it easy for these organizations to do something about it. Because if it's not easy, they might try, because everybody wants to do the right thing. But if they face hurdles because of lack of understanding, of lack of appropriate process, or it's not fast enough, because after all, they're running a business, then they're going to try once and then they're going to give up. So making it easy for them.
And do you think regulation and legislation should play a part in that now? You mentioned previously about legislation coming in within the financial sector's industry. Is it time now to look more towards an enforcement type scenario for small businesses?
So for small businesses, it's a tricky matter. They have a lot to contend with, especially now during the pandemic, when they're all suffering cash flows and they don't know where their business is going to be, surviving post-pandemic. So for them, it's making it easy, making it understandable. Indeed, the cybersecurity toolkit is an excellent idea, but the average run-of-the-mill bakers trying to get help, and indeed getting help from their bank or other financial services organization to try and get digital by offering them the facilities. But it's how part of that can you make it easy for them to protect themselves both from cybercrime and fraud. So it's a matter of language and explaining what the technology does, what it does, and also making it very, very easy for them. Because if it's not easy, they won't do it.
So I'm going to ask Brian now, how do you think the banking and finance sector can incentivise small businesses to take cybersecurity and fraud seriously and to take action to secure themselves?
So I don't think there's a lack of incentive in areas where the cyber attack or the fraud attack is going to have a direct impact on that business. So I don't think there's too many small businesses who are unaware of the cyber risk or unaware of the significant implications that would have for them if they were subject to a successful cyber attack, or indeed if they were subject to a fraud attack. I think the area where it gets a bit more grey, when you mentioned regulation, that there may be more of an argument for that, is where there isn't a direct impact on that business, but the information, for example, the data that is stolen is used to commit crime elsewhere. So, areas where you've got weak cyber controls, and those cyber controls allow you to get credit card information, log on information, etc., etc. Often that business will not be targeted by that fraud. That fraud will occur elsewhere by using that to either socially engineer the victim or to access data that enables you to get through the security arrangements, either with a telephone company or with a bank or whatever. So I think it's those areas where there's no direct impact on the small business, that they need to be incentivized to respond. And those areas where they understand the risks to their business and they understand the impact of their business, the focus is on, as I mentioned earlier, the education, the training, the awareness, and making tools available to them to help them to protect themselves.
Okay, thank you. And Neira?
So to add to what Brian just said, let's not forget, cybercrime and fraud are intrinsically linked, especially when it comes to financial interactions. So therefore, by transitivity, cybersecurity and fraud prevention are intrinsically linked, because in most cases, failure in one will invariably lead to the other, which has a financial income. So I think my parting word would be, information security specialists need to work very, very closely with their fraud prevention colleagues. Generally, information security will sit within the technical organization of a company. And generally, the fraud prevention organization will sit within the risk organization, reporting to somebody like the chief risk officer. So you will see invariably, have you ever heard of anyone in the risk area, such as the chief risk officer, saying that they actually like budget to do what they do? No, me neither. And that is because corporate risk is a very well understood thing. Cyber risk, which should be part of corporate risk, is not or has not yet reached that level of maturity. It is getting better. So my advice to information security guy, and we know it's a very well-known CISO mantra, I can't get the budget. Work with your fraud colleague, because they're probably trying to address the very same thing, and they probably also have the money for it.
Thank you, Neira. That's a very good point. If we look more specifically at small businesses, though, if many small businesses don't have the, I would call it the luxury of different divisions, and they're running around sort of trying to deal with their everyday activities, what could they do better?
Well, what I would suggest to them is look at where you're actually experiencing fraud. There is probably a very well explainable root cause, which probably is a cybersecurity failure.
Thank you. Thank you, Neira. Thank you, Brian. It's been a very interesting and enlightening discussion we've had today. So thank you very much for your time.